Hello and welcome to today's spooky webinar, How to Avoid a Ransomware Horror Story. It's going to be spooktacular. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. This event is presented in partnership with Rubrik, and this is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot as well in the process. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about the event. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm glad to be serving as the moderator. We want these events to be educational, and we encourage your questions there in the questions pane. We also have a number of resources there in the handouts tab. I encourage you to check those out. And then at the end of the webinar, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab. We also have an additional best question prize for a $50 Amazon gift card. Of course, you have to ask a question to be entered into that drawing and also meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenter. Welcome, Mr. Jeff Inouye, Technical Marketing Architect at Rubrik. Jeff, it's great to have you back on. I always enjoy your presentations and demos, and I know you've got a lot in store for us today. Take it away.
Thanks, David. Hey, everyone, and welcome to our first segment in our masterclass series, where we're going to cover topics on data protection, data security, as well as extracting additional value from your backups. My name is Jeff Inouye, and I'm a technical marketing architect here at Rubrik, and I'll be your guide through this presentation as we examine the operational and architectural challenges in backup security. Today's presentation is on how to establish data security in your backups. We will start with the objective of backup security and examine the traditional problems that are encountered. We will then dive into the Rubrik solution and describe how we use a defense in depth strategy to create a scalable and secured solution for the enterprise. And finally, we'll round things out with a demo of one of our latest security enhancements. Data security is a challenging feat for the sysadmin through the CISO of an organization, as there's a myriad of solutions and design choices that have to be made to secure digital assets. But when we take a holistic view, backups, just like production data, need to have three main attributes: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Or in other words, you have to ask yourself, who or what has access to our backups and backup systems? Can we ensure the authenticity of our backups? Is our backup system ready to restore data when we need to recover? As we examine this problem further, what we've noticed in environments is the problem of a disjoint solution, or the scenario where the IT organization is responsible to bring the infrastructure to the table where the backup application is then installed. At the granular level, the sysadmin is responsible for the patching and hardening of the individual systems within the stack. This ranges throughout the infrastructure layers of software and storage, as well as others as the deployment grows. This includes secure connectivity in the application stack, where security controls are directly correlated to the levels of operational policies, procedures, and templates that must be maintained for governance. Meticulous accounting and auditing of service, domain, and local accounts is required. Often you'll find it is a best practice to segment authentication domains and directory services. This is due to the integration of domain accounts as a dependency for the application to operate. The result is a deployment where the application and infrastructure are decoupled. The application lacks tight security controls over backups, as they have very limited, if any, visibility to the underlying infrastructure. Now that we have a baseline for some of the problems at hand, let's take a look at some of the resulting scenarios that pose a risk to your security posture. Access control management can experience sprawl and configuration drift as both domain and local accounts are individually managed, leading to security holes in the configuration. In the same light, weaker protocol security such as SMB or NFS can also lead to additional vulnerabilities. These protocols can be susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks and other techniques such as IP spoofing. Backup files are often stored in their native format, stored on multi-purpose file systems that are not immutable. Access can be gained through several vectors such as RDP, internet browsers, or other applications. If the operating systems are not properly secured, this can lead to additional risk of exfiltration. Although immutable storage repositories can be configured, they are still the responsibility of the administrator, and in essence, they are susceptible to the same operational risk. As a recap, the primary issue is that we end up with a decoupled application and infrastructure. Complex account hardening of both domain and local accounts have to be continually managed and scaled as the infrastructure team grows and as responsibilities shift. Multi-purpose file systems do not hold backups in an immutable format and require additional measures to ensure immutability. Continual patching and hardening of the backup stack are the sole responsibility of the IT administrator. Now that we have tabled some of the common problems in backup security, let's take a look at how Rubrik addresses these problems from the ground up with a defense-in-depth approach. Security has always been an important part of Rubrik, and we continue to make it better and stronger every day in an effort to defeat ransomware and other malicious activity. Our product is designed and built based on an approach that incorporates security controls at multiple layers to defeat attacks. These layers act independently and provide defense against malicious activity. If a layer fails, the next layer picks up. If we start at the core where the data is stored, the Atlas file system is a purpose-built file system that is built for security, resiliency, and data integrity at scale. The file system was built with the intent to support backup and recovery. Therefore, it was built to resolve common problems of backup security as well as expedited recovery. Let's take a walkthrough of a backup operation and a recovery operation in action to see how the Atlas file system maintains integrity and the availability of backups. When a backup is ingested by the system, it is broken up into blocks that are checksummed, and then the CRCs are written to a fingerprint file. To ensure integrity, this fingerprint file is always referred to when Rubrik handles the backup file during a recovery or an automated data integrity check. While writes are being performed on the system, Atlas distributes the data to the appropriate nodes to maintain fault tolerance. The file system is also topology aware, so even in our largest production clusters, we can guarantee data resiliency and data availability. When you need to restore data, the certified Rubrik services retrieve patch files from Atlas. Each patch file and related patch blocks are validated against the fingerprint file. This ensures that all data recovered for you is the same data that you originally backed up. This is done on an automated basis in the background, as well as an inline read process to ensure data integrity. If we think about the interconnect of any backup system, the network isn't typically that complex. It is, however, pretty challenging to secure the connectivity from end to end for all systems in the stack. This is where a zero trust design comes in handy. With the application and infrastructure tightly coupled, Rubrik can effectively maintain explicit trust to enforce node validation, mutual authentication, and ciphers to support secure communications. This model also scales linearly as new nodes are added to the cluster. Taking a step back, the insight into who or what has access to your backups is essential. In Rubrik, we can assign granular permissions to specific objects across cloud, data center, and SaaS, and have it propagate throughout the environment to secure your backup data. Customers often map our solution into existing organizational roles and functions, as well as existing SSO infrastructure that they already have. This provides a seamless integration into their current security strategy. Multi-factor authentication has been a part of the Rubrik product for a while now, but we recently increased our access security with a time-based, one-time password feature where we can integrate with SAML 2.0 compliant applications. This provides an additional layer to our defense-in-depth approach. As a workflow, a user provides their credentials and is then prompted for their one-time password on their secondary device. Once this is successfully entered, access is granted to the system. Directory services are a key threat to backup security when compromised. In other words, if there's only a username and password protecting your backups, then there's a security issue that needs to be resolved. Remember the rogue admin from a few slides ago? Well, he's back, and this time he wants to wreak havoc on your Rubrik system. He's passed by multi-factor authentication and intends to make modifications to an SLA policy for your Tier 1 systems. Unfortunately for him, he has run into our SLA retention lock, which prohibits any reduction to data retention, removal of systems, or modification to the replication or archival policy. These types of changes can only be performed with Rubrik support intervention, where two pre-selected individuals in your organization have to validate their identity and grant permission to perform actions. Now let's circle back to the previous problems that we traditionally encountered in backup environments and recap on how Rubrik solves these challenges. With a secure, scale-out solution that protects your hybrid cloud environment, you gain tight control over system access with global RBAC, granular permissions, and multi-factor authentication that all provide layer protection against unauthorized access. A zero-trust architecture defends against man-in-the-middle and IP spoofing attacks by granting explicit trust to user and system resources. And finally, the Atlas file system that is purpose-built for the application and provides immutable backups with guaranteed integrity. Let's hop into the demo and take a look at how simple it is to enable multi-factor authentication with time-based, one-time password protection. Here we have Tim, who is logging into Rubrik CDM for the first time since the administrators turned on two-step verification. He enters his username and password as normal and is brought to a new dialog where he can configure his Authenticator app and retrieve a time-based one-time password. He scans the QR code and then provides the verification code. Now that Tim is granted access, if he ever needs to change devices or Authenticator applications, he can do that inside the Rubrik UI on his own. Let's take a look at the login process after he's configured for MFA and a time-based one-time password. Once again, he puts in his username and password and is then prompted for the verification code from his Authenticator app. This two-step verification feature is critical if directory services is ever compromised in your environment. As discussed during the presentation, if your backups are only protected by a username and password, then there is a security issue that needs to be resolved. Back to you, David.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. Really enjoyed that. That was a cool demo. And I know you've got a lot more in store for us still on today's event. So let's move on now to our next segment.
Thanks, David. Hey, everyone, and welcome to our second segment in our masterclass series, where we're going to cover topics on data protection, data security, as well as extracting additional value from your backups. Ransomware attacks have followed a similar pattern of infecting systems. It all starts with the distribution campaign, where attackers use social engineering and weaponized websites to download a dropper, which kicks off the infection. The dropper then downloads the executable code, which installs the malicious software. As ransomware sets up, it embeds and establishes a persistence beyond a reboot. It then begins scanning for high-value content on both the local and network resources. This target data is then potentially exfiltrated and then encrypted locally to cripple system operations. If backups are unable to recover the environment, the attacker collects the ransom. There's been rapid development throughout this lifecycle, but what's really interesting is the intelligent techniques used during the initial phases of infection, staging, and scanning. So for example, during the infection and staging phases, attackers may employ techniques to evade detection. They can run completely in memory, masquerading as a known process within a system. They can sleep a process and stay dormant, and they can also use existing code bases like PowerShell. All these techniques can be used to build an attack network inside your perimeter and avoid detection through endpoint solutions. During the scan phase, attackers have become very patient to gather intel and move laterally across the network in hopes to gain access to higher value targets. These are things like centralized storage, authentication services, backups, and other Tier 0 systems. Backups serve a primary role in the effective recovery of data if those systems become compromised, but they are also in a unique position to provide insights through metadata analysis. If you take a step back and analyze the typical data environment, you'll typically see the four following buckets: production, or real-time data to applications and services; dev, test, and QA, for innovation and quality; analytics, to provide actionable insights from data; and backups, the last line of defense against human or machine error and malicious intent. Other than backups, the other three data services provide continual business value to the organization. So you have to ask yourself as a sysadmin, why wouldn't we capitalize on this data and the metadata at rest? One common scenario is that backup files are often archaic and lack intelligent descriptors to efficiently analyze or make use of. So enter the scene metadata, or data about data, which has been a godsend for the sysadmin. An operational example is the ability to easily work with large sets of data and objects by allowing tagging capabilities, so we can categorize, inventory, and govern our infrastructure systems. At a granular file level, metadata provides the same leverage to end users by providing expedited search results and rich content indexing. In the world of Rubrik backups, we capture metadata in the form of file name, type, access, and other useful content to fuel the feedback loop for behavior analysis. As backup metadata is pooled as a data resource, it creates a foundation for actionable insights without hindering production services. Techniques such as machine learning models and algorithms can be applied to this data resource to analyze randomness or data entropy, which is a characteristic of a ransomware event. Now that you understand the potential for backups to be used as a source of data intelligence through metadata, let's take a look at the foundational aspects of Rubrik Polaris and Polaris Radar. Then we'll dig in on how we extend our architecture for the hybrid cloud environment. When Rubrik Polaris was introduced 3 years ago, there were 3 customer goals in mind. Number 1, unify the customer view of data protection and data policies. Number 2, treat data as a first-class entity and unlock additional value to the customer. Number 3, provide a platform for protecting data wherever it resides, either on-prem or in the cloud. From this, the engineers at Rubrik built a SaaS solution that provides a scalable and secure data management platform for hybrid cloud infrastructure. As a sysadmin, what if you could log into a single interface to control your data protection? Rubrik Polaris gives you the control over governance and visibility of your data management activities that is packaged in a SaaS solution. This works in conjunction with our Cloud Data Management Software, or CDM, as well as our infrastructure, platform, and software as a service backup solutions. For example, you can enforce global protection policies, role-based access control, and logging and audit capabilities throughout all of your protected assets. In addition, Polaris provides the aggregation of backup metadata that is collected in line with your data protection scheme. This metadata resource is where we can extract additional value through machine learning modules such as Polaris Radar. With Radar, backup metadata is leveraged to identify anomalous behavior. In the case of ransomware, malicious activity, or operational mishaps, Radar can identify the blast radius of that event. Unlike other methods, data transformations from these events cannot be masqueraded or hidden from detection. Or in other words, these events cannot hide from the intel gathered from the data. Once Radar detects an anomalous event, it notifies the sysadmins and provides granular recovery options so that only required data is recovered versus an entire rollback of the environment. Before we jump into the demo, I want to provide a little bit of history about the machine learning algorithms that have evolved within the product. When initially released, the KNN algorithm was used because there was limited real-world data to be leveraged. But as more of this data was amassed, additional models such as random forest and neural net have been integrated to provide further accuracy. Given this is a modern SaaS product, these enhancements were delivered seamlessly to our customers, without the need for their intervention or operational lift to support additional infrastructure. Now let's dive into the demo and take a look at the detection and remediation workflows from the Radar interface. And as a bonus, I'm going to give you a sneak peek at one of our latest features called App Flows. An IT organization faces a critical set of challenges when ransomware strikes. It's an all-hands effort to identify compromised accounts, systems, and data. Let's say that you have been hit by ransomware, and the only information that you have is that application and file services are affected. In this demo, we will identify the impacted data through Polaris Radar and perform an in-place recovery with Polaris App Flows. From the Radar dashboard, let's navigate to the Anomalies page. AppFlows uses a construct of a blueprint, which is a collection of virtual machines and resource mappings that directs the system how to recover. It can be configured to orchestrate a successful application recovery, being mindful of the dependencies required. As you inspect the dashboard, it is clear that there is suspicious behavior in two of our applications. When you expand the blueprints, you can take a closer look at the details and identify which systems and data have been compromised. The multi-select capabilities allow you to initiate complex recoveries driven by a simple interface. When you click Recover, you can initiate the start of a recovery workflow. From here, you can view, edit, and drill down into individual objects in each blueprint. The analytics driven by Radar arm you with key information to assist you in recovery. The green shield indicates the last point in time where 0 anomalies were flagged, and a prime candidate for recovery. As we save the configuration, we also direct the system to pause if it is interrupted during the recovery process. At the confirmation page, we type in the word blueprint and click Recover to initiate the workflow. To view the progress of the recovery task, we simply click the Go to Recoveries button to monitor the progress. With Rubrik Polaris, you gain the integration of data insight and orchestrated DR so you can quickly and efficiently assess an attack and recover. Back to you, David.
That was awesome, Jeff. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed learning about Sonar and its power around data classification. So now I'm curious to learn what Rubrik can do around data visibility. Back to you, Jeff.
Thanks, David. Hey, everyone, and welcome to our third segment in our masterclass series, where we're going to cover topics on data protection, data security, as well as extracting additional value from your backups. When we talk about data classification, there are three foundational targets that we're trying to achieve. The first is the type of data, or do the contents include sensitive data like financial, health, and personal information? The second is data location. So where does this data sit in the system and in the environment? The third is the access levels, or in other words, who has access to what and what can they do? The unfortunate truth is this problem is becoming more difficult, and there are three driving factors. The first is a bit of a no-brainer. It's data growth. There's more applications and more data than ever before. The second is data regulations. So both state and national policy continue to contribute to increased regulation. The third is increased risk. So we now have a larger operational responsibility to understand data content, especially when we're trying to effectively recover from a malicious event like ransomware. When we evaluate customer environments, a common theme is to view data and applications as tiers. If we think about tier 0 and tier 1, we have applications like messaging, authentication, as well as key customer data through primary applications. This is where we typically find point solutions for data classification. There's one key problem here in that data classification needs to be encompassed throughout the entire data environment. Therefore, we have to potentially deploy agents and balance the impact on production resources because we're scanning where the data resides. This is where we can leverage backup data at rest to gain this visibility without having to deploy agents or balance production resources. Let's take a look at how Polaris Sonar works and how it's configured. There are two primary concepts to grasp here. The first is the analyzer. An analyzer is the individual definition of data that Sonar should be discovering. So this is really the search strings that are used during the scanning operations. The second is the policy. A policy is a logical grouping of one or more analyzers. So what a policy can do is it can create a larger definition, and it's very flexible in the deployment. So once a policy is created, we can apply it to objects within the environment. This can be everything from virtual machines from VMware, Microsoft, Nutanix, and then we can also look at NAS workloads and Windows and Linux as well. The approach to this is very straightforward. So Sonar is going to take the policies that you've applied, and then it's going to scan your existing backups to identify what sensitive data lives where. There are three use cases that we see typically for Sonar. The first is compliance. So we have built-in templates to scan under a particular regulation, or you can build a custom template from your own queries. The second is access control. So we have the visibility to the user permissions.
so we can identify easy security holes that have really high risk, such as global access or wide open permissions. The third is ransomware. So we're already providing a solution to securely back and recover, as well as identify anomalies. But what Sonar can do is it can be used to identify what data was exposed if an exfiltration event happens. So in other words, we know the systems that were impacted by the breach and understand the content of those systems. So let's dive into the demo and take a look at how we can identify sensitive data with Polaris Sonar. Okay, now that we're in the lab, let's take a look at the Sonar dashboard. From the top, we can see the total number of sensitive hits from the workloads that we have defined. Below that, we could take a look at things like files with sensitive hits and open access. And open access could be things like authenticated users or domain users. So anyone with a username and password has access to this sensitive data. The other is stale files with sensitive hits. This is sensitive data that hasn't been accessed in over a year, and potentially a good opportunity for cleanup. So let's take an example. Let's say we want to configure two policies for financial data and PII to run against my test VM in the lab. So to do that, we'll go ahead and click on Management and Configure Policies. We'll select US Financials and US PII. And then we'll go ahead and search for my VM. We'll select my VM and then click Configure. And just like that, I now have two policies applied to this workload to look for PII and financial data content. Let's take a look at a previous scan that I did on that same VM and observe the results. So what we're looking at here is the browse view, and we can walk the file system and understand where the sensitive data lives. On the right-hand side, you can see the classification details. You can also look at the file details or the folder details to give you the file path or the access time or the modified time. It also passes the permissions. So you can take this and look at something like a security audit and understand, hey, do these people need to have this type of access to this folder or file? So if we jump over to the file view, this is where things get a little bit more interesting, is that now we have a full list of everything that has sensitive data exposure. And from here, we can drill into things like files with hits and open access. So if we select this top file here, we can see that it has sensitive data exposure for the US PII policy. We can then drop over to users and then see that everyone has access to this particular file and something that needs to be remediated. Polaris Sonar grants the organization with actionable insights that can be leveraged to prevent a security event proactively or provide key information if a ransomware event occurs. David, back to you.
Very cool, Jeff. Protecting sensitive data is a huge challenge, and I think this could help a lot of companies. But I'm really curious, what happens if a company does get ransomware? How do you recover from that with Rubrik?
Thanks, David. Hey, everyone, and welcome to our final segment in our masterclass series, where we're going to cover topics on data protection, data security, and extracting additional value from your backups. So let's roll back the time 7 years or so. Compute virtualization is fully mainstream, and hopefully you have a good portion of your bare metal systems all redeployed on virtualization. Back then, disaster recovery solutions typically focused on a cratered site scenario. So what happened was point solutions came to the market to address that particular need. But the new challenge for the sysadmin is, how do we combat the scenario of ransomware? Or how can we quickly recover parts or all of data and services depending upon the scenario or the need? The point solutions of today draw from a similar theme that we talked about earlier in the webinar series, where the IT organization is responsible to bring the infrastructure to the table upon which the application is installed. The key issue, again, is that this introduces more complexity to the environment. So we have things like compatibility matrices, additional systems,
and dependencies throughout the infrastructure. So if we take an example like a standard migration of primary storage, that now has added constraints because you have applications that are now dependent upon the code or configuration of the environment. So in this solution, what we have is the typical command and control server or vCenter. And then we have application servers that typically have databases that you have to manage. These provide the runbooks, the inventories, and the scripts. What these application servers then do is they will broker actions to the underlying storage system to support the recovery plan. So what happens is all these components need to successfully integrate to provide a working solution. And many times, the complexity of the solution can often fail to remain operational due to the configuration changes that always happen within an environment. So let's take a look at our approach. What we've done is we've simplified backup, archive in the cloud, and securely managing data end-to-end. So 3 years ago, we introduced Rubrik Polaris. And this is a location where you can manage all your data from a single location. You can provide actionable insights with Rubrik applications. So if we think about things like ransomware remediation with Polaris Radar, or data classification with Polaris Sonar. So with our summer release, we're going to be adding orchestrated DR for applications called Polaris App Flows. And what Polaris App Flows does is it simplifies the implementation for DR orchestration. So what we have is an integrated approach to the disaster recovery solutions that you're used to and provide failover and failback between sites and ultimately on-prem to cloud. So since this is in our ecosystem, we can have deep integrations with other applications like Radar available day one. So let's take a look at how it works. In our system, we use what we call application blueprints. And these blueprints act as an orchestration engine for recoveries. The key difference here is we're working with a single piece of software to manage the solution. So what we get is reduced overhead and less dependencies within the environment. We also have more intelligence since Rubrik is already aware of the environment. So adding virtual disks or virtual machines are dynamically included in the blueprint. For the fastest recovery in RTO, we provide a technique called hydration. And what this does is it seeds the base copies to a target's recovery storage, and then incremental data is applied to that base image. So everything is ready to go when you need it. We also provide near zero RPO with our integrated continuous data protection. So VM-based workloads with CDP that provide granular recovery within our product today can be integrated with AppFlow's blueprints on day one. We also provide full failover and failback capabilities, and both directions are supported. The other nice feature here is that new full backups are not required since Rubrik is object aware between clusters. And of course, we have rich reporting for tabletop exercises or ongoing audits. So let's jump into the demo and take a look at AppFlows, where we're going to take the insights from Radar and kick off a recovery operation. An IT organization faces a critical set of challenges when ransomware strikes. It's an all-hands effort to identify compromised accounts, systems, and data. Let's say that you have been hit by ransomware, and the only information that you have is that application and file services are affected. In this demo, we will identify the impacted data through Polaris Radar and perform an in-place recovery with Polaris AppFlows. From the Radar dashboard, let's navigate to the anomalies page. AppFlows uses a construct of a blueprint, which is a collection of virtual machines and resource mappings that directs the system how to recover. It can be configured to orchestrate a successful application recovery, being mindful of the dependencies required. As you inspect the dashboard, it is clear that there is suspicious behavior in two of our applications. When you expand the blueprints, you can take a closer look at the details and identify which systems and data have been compromised. The multi-select capabilities allow you to initiate complex recoveries driven by a simple interface. When you click Recover, you can initiate the start of a recovery workflow. From here, you can view, edit, and drill down into individual objects in each blueprint. The analytics driven by Radar arm you with key information to assist you in recovery. The green shield indicates the last point in time where 0 anomalies were flagged, and a prime candidate for recovery. As we save the configuration, we also direct the system to pause if it is interrupted during the recovery process. At the confirmation page, we type in the word blueprint and click recover to initiate the workflow. To view the progress of the recovery task, we simply click the Go to Recoveries button to monitor the progress. With Rubrik Polaris, you gain the integration of data insight and orchestrated DR so you can quickly and efficiently assess an attack and recover. Back to you, David.
That was awesome, Jeff. Thank you so much. Now, I would love to hear from a real customer who has used Rubrik to recover from a ransomware attack. Let me now turn it over to real Rubrik customers from Lang's Building Supply.
So imagine this. You've got a holiday planned, weekend away, your wife's looking forward to it, your friends are looking forward to it, everyone's been cooped up because of COVID, finally some downtime, and then you get that dreaded phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning and you realize all your plans are about to change. Jump in the car and actually drive to the office. I think I had a pair of board shorts on, a t-shirt and a pair of flip-flops. So not exactly business corporate attire, but I bring up the system and the system doesn't come up. All right, so as soon as you hit that console, all right, where you're getting the raw picture of what that machine's doing, and you see this bootloader that says, you've been hacked, sort of thing, boom, it's like a Scud missile going off. You realise that, okay, this isn't just an unplanned outage. This is a targeted attack. You're on the pointy end of the kebab knife.
I don't know if I was lucky or not, but I was sleeping through the initial part of the attack, and I'm a deep sleeper, so I didn't find out until I got into the office. That morning I was looking forward to heading off a bit early and going camping with the family for the weekend after all of that lockdown. I get into the office and I see Matt there, and I think he's not supposed to be here. He's supposed to be away as well. Sure enough, he says, we've been hacked. And I didn't really know what to think at that point because I'd never really been through a ransomware event or anything like that. I would go and walk over to his desk. He's got Radar open there, and sure enough, there's a big compromise there. Radar's an AI-driven, basically anomaly detection software hosted by Rubrik, in which the metadata of activity with your files and such gets sent to Rubrik, assessed based on AI that's been trained throughout the world, and then alerting you to any anomalies. And that's particularly useful for ransomware attacks in which you have tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of files in the span of minutes being encrypted or deleted in some cases, like we experienced, and really helps you assess the scope of the threat and where you need to start targeting your recoveries.
If there was one, shining light at this point in time, it was a Friday. So because we're a manufacturing organisation primarily, it's a half day. So we weren't going to lose a full day of production, but we were going to lose a full day in terms of other areas of business. And I at this stage, I'd been only looking at it for like 45 minutes, and I could ascertain that this wasn't going to be a quick fix like previous ones, because previous attacks were pretty one-dimensional. So, and they're automated. There wasn't a human being or a set of human beings at the other end of the barrel pulling strings, and this time there were. We were profiled, and what do I mean by that? Well, they looked at our business, and they took their time. They didn't attack us directly, right? They found a trusted source that we trusted implicitly. It was an email, it looked legit, and really it was legit because it came from the right email address, the right account, in the right format. It just had one slight detail. The the link that they usually use to send us purchase orders didn't go to them, it went somewhere else. 2 weeks later, they have, they've logged into the system, they've looked for elevated writes via vulnerabilities, so they've been very good at catching us out on a patch cycle. So like most organisations, we do patch cycles monthly. They found a vulnerability that got them elevated writes to the network. Then they could push that information back to themselves in the Netherlands, and then they tiered the attack and they kicked it off at 2 a.m. When they knew no one was going to be around. They're smart, right? So these things come in waves. So the attack, I would say, had the first wave, which is the one on Friday morning that I walked into at work, and we cleaned it up. Well, we thought we cleaned it up, because then came the second wave at 8 o'clock at night.
Just as we're about to pack up for the day, we're pretty exhausted. We've just pulled a lot of man hours, and suddenly everything starts going down again. The next day, we're pretty much flat out just trying to recover, and again, we get to a point where we think we've killed it. Then that night, Matt and I just a little curious. We thought we might just try and log in remotely, and sure enough, we can't get in, and pretty scary moment. So Matt goes into the office, and sure enough, compromised again.
I take it quite personally. You get these 6 degrees of emotions almost, right? So there's anger, there's regret, because you feel like maybe you've had a failing in yourself, and you haven't led your team correctly. But they go to the wayside pretty quick, because really you come to the realisation that you've just got to get on with it, and you almost get this rah-rah feeling of, we've got this. You think you've been successful in attacking us, but here comes the counterpunch, all right? And with Rubrik, we understand that we've got a very good right hook, and we're going to come back hard, and at the end of the day, this is just going to be an inconvenience. It's just a matter of how big an inconvenience it's going to be. I had my guys, it was like, 1 a.m. in the morning. We're at the whiteboard, we've planned it out, we've got all the moving components in place, and we've got Rubrik ticking away, recovering all our stuff. And I just had this blinding flash of the obvious. This war's won. It's not, the battles are over, we've been fighting battles all day, but we're at this point now where I can happily declare the war is won. All right? There might be a couple of more cleanups that we've got to do, but I knew that people's jobs were safe. I'll be honest, there's a lot of pressure on me as a CIO when we've got no production happening in a factory that employs hundreds and hundreds of people, and I've got to send those people home. I take a personal hit on that. I feel quite personally obligated to those people on forklifts and nail guns and running our automated saws and stuff that their livelihoods are in my hands. So I put a lot of personal pressure on myself, but the business puts a lot of pressure on me. Our customers put a lot of pressure on me, even though they don't even know that they're exerting it, to get us back into the throw of things. There was one organisation that it took them 6 months to recover, and they didn't do any local manufacturing for a month. And my managing director pulled me aside over a beer, and he said, "Wow, I don't even want to know what the world looks like. I don't even want to think about what the world would look like if we didn't do manufacturing for a month." That would be a serious detriment to our business, and one that we might not be able to recover from. So it's not just Rubrik's not just about recovering from ransomware. Rubrik is the difference between survival and non-survival in this new digital age.
Well, even as a medium-sized organization, we get attacked all the time. But in order to actually keep the 99.99% of attacks out of the way, we really need to ensure that we're always strengthening our security in line with our policies. And so technology is always changing, but people are always changing as well. And so our threat landscape is always evolving.
I think it's just a evolving sort of mission of white hats versus black hats and how we overcome each other. I would say that human people are still your number one defense. But when they fail, you've got to have things like Rubrik there to save the day. They've only got to get it right, for a minute in a day. We've got to get it right 24/7, 365, right? If one of our staff, and there's thousands of them, if only one of those people makes a mistake and gets it wrong, we've got a problem. Rubrik as a company have been amazing, right? The support that we get from Rubrik, and during the attack, Dale's reaching out to me, who's our engineer at Rubrik on a local scale, and he said, "Hey, is there anything I can do to help?" And I'm responding to him on WhatsApp saying, "No, Aaron's in love with this thing. He's got it. He's cool." But there's this constant communication. I think that's a big part of confidence in a product, is having confidence in the people. So, I've got confidence in Rubrik as the technology and the digital stuff it does, but I've also got confidence that I've got a support network from Rubrik that have got my back and they've got my team's back. So, Aaron went from, I've heard about this Rubrik thing, we've had it in the company forever, it was here before I got here, done my apprenticeship time here, but I've not really been exposed to it. And then this happens, and because it's so intuitive and so easy to use and so fast, he could just latch onto it and run with it, and then he puts in a couple of support calls because he had some questions about the APIs and how do we recover this stuff easily on a bulk level. So I don't want to just recover one or two files here, I want to recover hundreds of thousands of them. How can I do this programmably so that I'm not clicking buttons in the interface all the time? And support worked with him to make sure all these things happen, and he's going, man, I love these guys.
This was the first large-scale event in which I'd used Rubrik, and yet I was all over it. Really, it was particularly intuitive, and wherever I had any knowledge gaps, I'd just hop on with Rubrik support, and straight away they have 6 guys on a call with me in the AMs, any time zone, and just like that, we're recovering entire servers, entire file sets that I'd never even knew Rubrik was capable of.
One of the key elements of any ransomware attack is pressure, right? And how quickly and overwhelmingly they can apply it. They saw us clean up. They knew we used Rubrik, right? They sent us an email that said, "Hey, we've been monitoring you. We see you recovered really well. You used Rubrik. That's really smart. But we've got your data and we're going to sell it. So still pay us," right? And that creates worry because they don't just send that to the IT guys. They send that to everybody in the company they can find an email address for, right? So you get all these phone calls and worried people. But then you start to go, well, hang on, do they really have our data? Because I find that a bit hard to believe, because that would be an awful lot of data, right? They're saying they've got financial information. They're saying they've got P&Ls, customer database, all this sort of stuff. And you go, well, hang on, I know what data I've got, I know where it is, and I know they can't get to it because we use tools like Sonar that have data governance that tells us where things live and how they live. So then you go to the firewall records and go, well, actually, give me a report of all data that went out of my network. And you find out, oh, crap, they got 13 gig of data. But then you realize, well, actually, it was just ping traffic. It wasn't actually data at all. So they don't actually have anything.
They're realizing they're not going to beat us on the technical side. We've got Rubrik, we've got these recovery tools that can help us recover no matter how much they try to kick us down. We managed to get reports from our ISP and we know they haven't got our files. They're bluffing. And so when they send through that email, to us, yes, it's initially scary, but it's also an indicator that they're desperate. They know they can't crack us. And so one last Hail Mary, start deleting files instead of encrypting them. And try to make the executives a little worried, but we're good.
I think in terms of a singular event that clinched it was being able to recover all the machines with Rubrik. Right, that was the saving grace. Right? That was the hallelujah moment where we knew that we were going to be fine, because they just couldn't get to it. It was immutable. They locked out of it. it was, a universe too far for them. The access that they had managed to achieve through using exploits and stuff wouldn't work on Rubrik. It's one of the reasons we purchased it in the first place. That was a totally standalone, walled garden approach, if you will, that was easily to get back from. Right? It was fast. And that in itself was very, very significant. And the key point that underpinned the recovery is having it. Without it there, I don't want to think about it.